on the 17th of July, 1955. Oh, wait, no, sorry, wrong channel. On the 17th of July, 1955, a brand new, barely finished Disneyland welcomed the public for the first time. It was a revolution. Yes, people had seen amusement parks before, but Disneyland promised to be something altogether different. Bigger, better, shinier, and more magnificent. Something that would one day be described as the happiest place on Earth. But if you were there on that opening day in 1955, you might well have thought that Disneyland was doomed. Because the first day of Disneyland was a day of, to put it mildly, absolute chaos. This is the story of the first disastrous day of Disneyland. Walt Disney first came up with the idea for Disneyland while visiting Griffith Park in Los Angeles with his daughters. While his beloved children laughed and played and rode the carousel, Disney watched from the sidelines and thought to himself, "This is garbage." Okay, so he probably didn't think that exactly, but he certainly thought that there could be something better. Something more ambitious than an ordinary carousel and more polished than the standard travelling fairground. A place where whole families, not just the kids, could enjoy rides and attractions together. But Walt was a busy man, so he shelved the idea in the back of his brain and went back to working in the movie business. There, he was inundated with letters from fans of his animated films, asking if they could visit his studio to see the magic being made. Disney wanted to welcome visitors, but there was a problem. The problem was this: movie studios are, in reality, not all that magical. They're places of work more than they are places of wonder and whimsy. He could throw open the doors, but people would turn up expecting Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and instead get Willy's chocolate experience. So instead, Disney conceived of a park themed around his iconic Mickey Mouse character. It would be a modest little project built on some land adjacent to the studio. A children's play park, a picnic area, a boat ride, and a few other bits and pieces to make it worth a visit. Take a look at what Disneyland ended up being, and you can see that the idea of a modest play park rather got away from him. In fact, the more he worked on the idea, the bigger it became. Disney took inspiration from existing theme parks like the historical Tivoli Gardens in Denmark, and also from the extravagant World Fair that had recently taken place in New York, and conceived of something big, bold, and thoroughly genre-defining. He came up with Disneyland. Researchers helped Disney pick out a spot south of Los Angeles, where the planned park would have room to grow over the years. Disney's many designers and artists went to work on concepts for everything from rides and attractions to costumes and characters. The park was beginning to take shape. There was only one problem: money, or rather, lack of it. To be clear, Disney was by no means poor at this time, but the capital required to build something so ambitious was beyond even his deep pockets. To get around this pecuniary hurdle, he brokered a deal with newly created television network ABC. ABC was in fact so new that they didn't really have much by way of content. So, the deal was this: Disney, that is Walt Disney, would make a show called Disneyland to be aired on ABC. In exchange, ABC would fund Disneyland, the park, which Disney, the man, could advertise using Disneyland, the show. It might sound like a weird arrangement, but it worked. The show appeared on screens in 1954, the same year that the park began construction, and while it strived to be entertaining in its own right, it never forgot its main job: to aggressively promote Disney stuff. So, while labourers toiled in the hot California sun to build Frontierland, the show broadcast segments telling the stories of the historical characters that inspired the land, frontiersman and folk hero Davy Crockett being a standing favourite. Meanwhile, as Fantasyland took shape, the show hosted cartoons featuring characters going on fantasy adventures. Every part of the planned park had a corresponding segment on the show. Tomorrowland naturally lent itself to discussions on how we'd all be flying around in rocket ships by the year 1985, and Adventureland often looked at exotic destinations and incredible animals. Obviously, no opportunity was missed to drop in a mention of some feature of the upcoming park or a work-in-progress Disney film. The series was, in many ways, an incredibly long and unusually entertaining advert, like the shopping channel, but the only product is a ticket to Disneyland that you won't be able to buy until next year. But given that even the concept of advertising on TV was kind of a new idea, it wasn't short on viewers. People all over the country tuned in on a regular basis, and so when Disneyland finally neared completion, excitement levels were through the roof. A lot would hang on the brand new park's first day. Everybody was dying of curiosity to see what was inside, and nobody knew for sure yet whether it would be a grand success or a miserable flop. As such, big plans were made for opening day, the 17th of July, 1955. For this grand opening, hundreds of members of the press, VIPs, and the 1950s equivalent of influencers were invited to come and see what the fuss was all about for themselves with an exclusive day of celebrations. And, to add to the pressure, there'd also be a live broadcast from the park on that day, a broadcast the likes of which nobody had ever seen before. Multiple cameras, hordes of celebrity guests, live interviews, parades, and presentations. It was all planned out in exacting detail to be a day of unforgettable spectacle, whether you were lucky enough to secure an invite or were just watching on the tube at home. Basically, if there ever was a singular day in Walt Disney's life that absolutely had to go well, this was it. And of course, it went terribly. The problems were numerous. To start with, the crowds were completely out of control from the off. Around 15,000 people had been invited, with most of them issued a simple paper ticket, marked with the time they were supposed to arrive. The timings were important since there'd be filming activity and parades throughout the day, and so crowd control was of vital importance. The general public, however, didn't much care for Disney's best-laid plans. At least a few dozen people took one look at the flimsy tickets and realized they could basically run those off on a Xerox machine with almost no difficulty whatsoever. Counterfeit tickets were rife. In fact, by some accounts, there was an almost 1-to-1 ratio of fake tickets to real ones. 15,000 people were expected, 28,000 people turned up. Whoops. Most of those extra guests were clutching a counterfeit ticket or two. But if you hadn't been able to snag one, that really wasn't a problem. Hundreds of people hopped fences, waded across drainage ditches, or otherwise found their way into Disneyland without ever passing through the entrance gate. Indeed, stories abound of a man with a ladder who circled the park, pitching up against the fence and charging gatecrashers a couple of dollars apiece to take the express route into the park. Of course, with that many people in attendance, traffic jams on the roads around the park were huge. By the time many people arrived, they'd been stuck in their car for quite some time. Their excitement over seeing what Disneyland had to offer was therefore trumped only by their excitement about finding the nearest bathroom. Roy O. Disney, Walt Disney's brother and the man in charge of managing the finances of the Disney Corporation, headed out to the car park on opening day to watch the throngs of visitors. He was approached by an anxious parking attendant who told him that kids were urinating all over the lot, something that the attendant was worried wasn't a great look for opening day. Roy, however, wasn't worried. He figured that they'd paid to be there, so who was he to tell them that they couldn't spend a penny in the bushes? God bless them, he told the parking attendant. Let 'em pee. So, once you got through the massive traffic jams, made your way past the ranks of urinating children, and paid the ladder man $5 to let you climb over the fence, what would you find inside the magical and highly anticipated Disneyland? Well, one thing you'd find a lot of is empty space. Disneyland had been built, start to finish, in exactly a year and a day, and while that sounds quite lovely and whimsical, the difficult truth is that a year and a day isn't enough time to build a massive world-class theme park. In fact, it takes almost that long to build a single house. The park was a little bit unfinished, is what I'm saying. For example, the landscaping around Canal Boats of the World, the ride that later became Storybook Land, hadn't even been started, let alone finished. So, in a budget-friendly big brain move, builders adorned clumps of weeds with signs bearing Latin plant names, to make it look as though they were supposed to be there. Elsewhere, water fountains were in short supply. Thanks to a poorly timed plumber's strike, the Disneys had been forced to choose between finishing the toilets and finishing the water fountains. Wisely, they chose the former. But this meant that there was nowhere to grab a drink of water on this scorching hot July day. Guests had to content themselves with a refreshing coffee or soda, something that led to some raised eyebrows and accusations that the lack of water fountains was a deliberate ploy to sell more Pepsi, since Pepsi was, in fact, sponsoring the whole event. While you were buying your 6th Pepsi of the day, you could also pick up the rest of your shopping too. To keep the budget under control, Disney had leased out the shops on Main Street to popular brands, meaning that you could buy a surprisingly wide range of goods during your visit to the happiest place on Earth. Hardware, glassware, and baby clothes were some of the more unexpected items you could pick up. And there was also an intimate apparel store, courtesy of bra maker Hollywood Maxwell. It even featured a live version of its mascot, the so-called Wonderful Wizard of Bras, who looked like this. The wizard, alas, wasn't the only utterly nightmarish character wandering around Disneyland when it opened for business. All your favourites were there, including Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and something I'm reliably assured is supposed to be Dumbo. If you're wondering why the characters that we all know and love look so goofy, it's again a question of time. With the rushed production schedule, there wasn't time to put together new, good-looking costumes for the launch day, and so Disney instead borrowed costumes that were intended for a Disney on Ice show. The crucial thing about Disney on Ice is that you don't see the costumes close up, although I'd argue that this wouldn't pass muster at any distance. Although, at least if you're seeing it from afar, you know you have time to run away. That wasn't an option for some visitors on Disneyland's opening day, because it being a gala event, they'd come in their best high heels. And it being an only just finished on time park, the asphalt hadn't fully set, resulting in said high heels sinking right into it. And that was just the start. As the day went on, things got steadily worse and worse. Queues were huge and unmanaged, multiple rides broke down, every concession stand ran out of food, the heat was unbearable, and to top it all off, a gas leak eventually closed the entirety of Fantasyland, Frontierland, and Adventureland. Which was a shame, but I suppose you could always try again tomorrow, land. Watching a recording of the live broadcast, you do get some sense of this mounting chaos, but the programme has so many manic, surreal moments of its own that you never get the chance to think too deeply about what it was like to actually be there. It's immensely worthwhile giving the broadcast a watch, but for a little taster, I'm just going to rapid-fire list some of the things that happened during it. 1. A presenter describes Disneyland as the 8th wonder of the world, and the opening day broadcast as like 3 volcanoes all going off at once. 2. There's a barrage of celebrity cameos, including an appearance by Ronald Reagan, who was, it turns out, making a living as an actor before the politics thing panned out for him. 3. A child is handed a gun and told to fire it into the air to summon Davy Crockett. The gun fails to fire, but they plough on anyway. 4. Presenter Bob Cummings, having delightedly introduced his wife and children to the viewers, is later seen kissing a random dancer when the camera cuts back to him unexpectedly. 5. Frank Sinatra shows up on Autopia for approximately 2 seconds, gets rammed by Sammy Davis Jr., and is never seen or heard from again. 6. Presenter Art Linkletter serves up the following word salad while referring to a music shop on Main Street. If you were courting a gal, that's where you'd buy your mandolin or your banjo and start tuning it up for the Sunday canoe ride. Oh, you kids. 23 skidoo. 7. There are so many moments when people miss their cue, can't find their microphone, or start delivering a segment and then just trail off looking confused. It's glorious. The whole thing feels like it's barely holding itself together. Which, to be fair, is probably accurate. Walt Disney himself featured prominently in the broadcast, and as such he spent most of the day running around giving speeches, shaking hands, and introducing different lands. He was so busy that he didn't hear about any of the opening day chaos until later. I couldn't find any report of how he took it in the moment, but if he was angry or disappointed, he didn't let it dictate what he did next. Rather, he did the best thing he probably could have done under the circumstances. A do-over. He and his people worked double time to fix all the problems that the opening day had highlighted, and then invited the press back for a second go to see the real Disneyland, minus the chaos broadcasts and plus water fountains, an actual ticketing system, and more than a handful of functional rides. And, much to his relief, it worked. Disneyland was well reviewed on its second attempt, and the guests flocked in from all over the country. It had been, safe to say, a bit of a bumpy ride, but Disneyland made it in the end. In the years since, the park and the Disney Corporation as a whole has gone from strength to strength, with the occasional $300 million misstep here and there. So Disney's chaotic opening day didn't hurt the parks too badly. In fact, the stories of just what a mess opening day were have become a beloved part of Disney lore. Disney himself didn't love it. Within the company, that day was referred to as Black Sunday, and Walt always insisted that it didn't count as the official opening day of the park. That honour was, throughout his lifetime, given to the 18th of July, the day after the opening when the park welcomed the general public to a much improved Disney experience. Now, however, Disney, the company, not the man, he died ages ago, have come to acknowledge the 17th of July as the true birthday of Disneyland, the beginning of a legendary theme park franchise, and a day of legendary chaos. The fact that such an out-of-control opening weekend is remembered so fondly is perhaps a testament to just how incredibly successful the Disney parks have gone on to be.